that.
USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Well, good evening and welcome to a special live edition of Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Jim, we've just watched the selection show and we've seen the field of 16. We're hoping to speak as planned shortly with the chairman of the committee, Mike Kemp. But let's start out right away. First, a mention about St. Lawrence and the terrible news that broke around 5 p.m. today.
Really difficult that their coach their head coach had been diagnosed COVID positive this morning in their testing. And because of that, the team decided not to accept the auto bid. I don't know all of the logistics. I think contact tracing has a ton to do with it. Maybe Mike Kemp can shed some light on that. But because of that, the St. Lawrence Saints, which had gotten into the tournament in dramatic fashion, having to beat both Colgate and Quinnipiac. Both games, I believe, were overtime. Obviously, we knew the championship game was. Tough road to get there, but they did it. A 6-win team was in the NCAA tournament for the first time ever, and then they had to reject the auto bid, which opened up a space for another team. But for St. Lawrence, you just feel for the players. It's so difficult to go out and win a championship and feel like you did everything right. And then, unfortunately, because of COVID, which, obviously we know what happens, it canceled the entire tournament last year. And this year, here we are in a situation where you think you've gotten through the season. And we know every team had COVID pauses and it was difficult, but you thought you were in a good position. And here we are in the NCAA tournament, a couple of hours before the selection show. And here's what happens. You've lost one of your teams. So it's very difficult situation. But it's not something, this might not be over. Don't forget, teams can still, and we saw it in basketball last night with Virginia Commonwealth. They had to bow out before their game with Oregon last night. It was declared no contest and Oregon moved on. But you could have this happen throughout the tournament. We don't know. So it's one of those situations that you hope to avoid things like this, but there's no guarantees. And you got to remember this team just played Quinnipiac last night, and Quinnipiac is in the tournament. From what they said on the selection show, 7 p.m. Monday is the deadline to drop out of the tournament and be replaced with another team. But after that, if a team has to drop out of the tournament, their opponent would move on as a no contest. So it's a strange tournament. We know it's been a strange year. Here we are again with a very odd situation.
Yeah, very difficult one. And that actually seems to have opened the door for Notre Dame to be in the tournament. They would have been the last team not in, and they were able to get a bid because of that, and also juggled the 15th and 16th seeds overall. American International would have been in Albany. Instead, Notre Dame goes there, and AIC ends up at Fargo. So it affected, at least the bottom of the bracket, and maybe makes a difference for Boston College, maybe a more difficult opponent in Notre Dame.
Yeah, I won't even try to sum that up or surmise what BC thinks about it. Yes, you have a rival now. You've got a very good team in Notre Dame that they'll play. Listen, AIC is going to be a tough team. We know what happened 2 years ago when they played St. Cloud State in the first game. So we know that it's not just automatic and easy when you get the 16th seed in this tournament. There's been too many upsets in recent years, almost all of them done by the Atlantic Hockey Conference. So I think that you look at the way that things had to shift. You now have a great rivalry matchup, Boston College against Notre Dame. You now have AIC heading out to Fargo, playing a very difficult opponent, almost in their home building, with what I think I'm pretty sure is going to be between 2,500 and 3,000 fans in the stadium. So it's a challenge, and that's, listen, the NCAA tournament is a challenge, and any team that wins this thing went through a tough road to do so. So let's, I guess we have to kind of just let things play out. Boston College, I don't think who cares who they're going to play. They're coming off a tough semifinal loss to UMass Lowell in the Hockey East tournament where they thought they had the game wrapped up. So I think they just want to get back on the ice and play when they can. That's one of those situations. So it changes things, but changed almost to these coaches at this point probably doesn't matter much.
Well, let's. Why don't we take a look at the brackets and kind of offer up some comments on that? The top four teams, the four number one seeds that will be the top seed in each regional, were in this order: North Dakota, Boston College, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. A lot of people's brackets didn't have Wisconsin. Some had UMass in there. Some had some other teams. Looking at those top four, anything really jump out at you other than maybe Wisconsin, which could have been fourth or fifth or sixth overall in that ranking?
Yeah, no, I think that everything they got right. I had UMass as my number 4 overall and had Wisconsin number 5. They basically just switched the two teams because UMass is in that same region with Wisconsin. So, if both teams move on, you would have the pure 4-5 matchup, I guess. So I don't think there was too much of a shifting once they set things up. But, Wisconsin's deserving. They had a great year. They've got some great players on that team, obviously showcasing Cole Caulfield down in Bridgeport with the regional that'll be called by John Butcher-Gross and Barry Melrose and Colby Cohen. Probably doesn't hurt. And it also puts a little bit of, excitement into that regional. UMass is a pretty exciting team. I'm not sure that Bemidji State and Lake Superior would draw the big national television audience. So putting Wisconsin there with UMass, I think both of those semifinal games, I believe that's a Friday, Saturday, will draw some better audiences. But I don't think you had to shift much. I think that you easily could have had Massachusetts as the number 1 seed in that region and Wisconsin as the number 2 seed.
Well, when we look at some of the other ones, when we take the top seeded North Dakota, as we mentioned, they will face AIC. But the other half of that bracket, these are two teams that you could have foreseen as being in the Frozen Four, but certainly only one of them now is going to be able to do it, and that's Michigan versus Minnesota Duluth.
It does feel like the bracket of death in Fargo. Obviously, North Dakota with that home ice advantage feeling, goes a long way. But then you put a Michigan team that we know was very good, young but extremely talented, and then Minnesota Duluth, 2-time defending national champions that they didn't catch fire in their conference tournament, but that doesn't mean that they won't do it in the postseason in the NCAA tournament. We've seen them do that basically the last 2 tournaments back in 2018 and 19. So I think that is, maybe people want to overlook AIC. I wouldn't do that. I kind of already mentioned that, but this becomes to me like a bracket of death. The potential for a massive upset and then 2 other teams in there that, like you said, easily could be Frozen Four teams, but they're going to have to survive a very, very tough bracket.
Yeah, I can guarantee you North Dakota is not going to look past American International. They've got tough goaltending, and all they have to do is look back to what AIC did to St. Cloud in that same regional 2 seasons ago.
No doubt. And I'm sure that Bradbury's a sharp enough coach. He'll notice that, and he'll remember it. And just one of those situations, you absolutely know that AIC goes in hungry every time they play in a tournament. Atlantic hockey teams go in hungry every time they play in an NCAA tournament. We've seen more upsets out of Atlantic hockey in the last 5-6 years than we have the WCHA. So you're talking, this is a league, and every time they put their team in, whomever it is, always seems to play well. So I don't think North Dakota will look past them, but I also don't think that AIC will bend over. They are way too good of a team. And everybody kind of underestimated, you heard a lot of people saying, oh, AIC, if they don't win their conference tournament, we don't want them in. I heard that from so many people over the last week, as I was saying, you and I have been talking that AIC was a lock, whether they won their tournament or not. And they comported themselves really well over the weekend, found a way to beat Niagara, found a way to beat Canisius, did so coming off having not played a game since the end of January. So I love AIC. I think it's a tough battle, but I think that they've faced tough battles in the past head on. I think that their coach, Eric Lang, will have them ready to go.
Well, good evening. We're now going to be joined by the chairman of the NCAA committee, Mike Kemp. Mike, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us this evening.
Oh, Jim, I'm really sorry I'm late. I got into another interview and I never got off of it. I apologize.
No worries there. Mike, we were already talking, Ed and I, a little bit about what today brought, and wasn't just the difficulty in selections, but obviously St. Lawrence having to bow out of the tournament after a Tier 1 positive test for COVID. How difficult as a committee member, as the chair of the committee, was it to get that news?
Oh, it was very difficult. You look at the kind of the joy that they had just 12, 13, 14 hours earlier. And then to have that come down, your heart just goes out to him. I could, seeing the quotes from Brett Brecky, I just feel horrible for him and for the players. They earned, and that's kind of why we play conference tournaments. It's a chance to earn that opportunity to go to the tournament, and they earned it. And then to have it taken away that way, it's just another one of the cold, harsh realities of COVID that that can be taken away from you in an instant.
The replacement, at least what we heard from John Buccigross on ESPN during the selection show, was Notre Dame. Was that a difficult decision when you look at the fact that now Notre Dame gets half the Big Ten into the tournament, whereas Hockey East you're 3 of 11. The WCHA is getting 3 out of 8. Was it a tough decision to put Notre Dame in over some other teams that were still left out of the bubble?
Well, in the process, to clarify that statement, in the process, we were still working on the last team in at that point in time when we got the word. And at that point in time, there were 3 teams under consideration. There was Omaha, there was Notre Dame, and there was Providence. Now, I was not privy to the conversation that went on for those 3 teams, because anytime Omaha's involved in the conversation, I have to be completely off the call. So I was off the call for much of the day as we went through those discussions. But I know that I think the committee did a great job of going through and picking the teams, and I know that they used all the resources that they had to their exposure at that point in time.
Mike, we had talked about a month and a half ago, and one of the things we talked about at the time was whether there was going to be any limitations in travel. It looks like if there were, they were not put to the forefront, because you have 2 Eastern teams heading to West Regionals, and if I do my math right, you have 3 Western teams heading to the East Regional. Was it more important to the committee to seed the tournament according to the 116, 215, 314, et cetera, than it was to make sure that teams were kept off airplanes, that travel would be handled as it needed to be?
When when it got down to when we started, to put the brackets together and put the sites together, the trying to keep bracket integrity, 116, as you say, 215, trying to maintain that as much as we could was the choice that we made. I think knowing that we were going to have to travel people, that was part of the decision, because we felt that we wanted to make it as even a playing field as we could, make it as balanced a playing field as we could, and follow the numbers that we presented for the basically for the four levels. Your one seeds, your 2 seeds, your 3 seeds, your 4 seeds, keeping them as close as we could.
We're talking with Mike Kemp. He's the chairman of the NCAA D1 Men's Ice Hockey Committee, and they've been busy over the last few hours selecting the field. Mike, as you got to the last few teams in, what were some of the biggest or most important criteria in determining which of those would make it? You mentioned Providence not in. Notre Dame and Omaha in. What kind of criteria really led to that?
Well, I think we try to look at winning percentages, and again, they're winning percentages in their own league, so it doesn't necessarily correlate the way it would if we were doing our normal year where you're going to have you're going to have non-conference competition. But then we also then took it down to looking at records against teams that are in the tournament, and that was one of the factors I think that helped us delineate some of the lesser, the closer teams apart, so we could kind of get a feel for what teams had done during the course of the season against teams that were really were under consideration and in the tournament. And so that would be kind of the way it broke down. Notre Dame had done well against teams in their conference that were in the tournament. UNO had good wins. Providence had not had as many wins against teams that were in the tournament in their conference as the other two.
When you went a little bit before all this happened, there was an announcement that there would be some advisory committees, adding on 3 from the West region and 3 from the East region. How did that work out, having the extra help looking at this?
I think we felt going into this, they were a big help. I think getting perspective from the coaches, certainly it was, like you have, whether it's East or West regional, you don't have the advantage this year, again, of them playing against teams from the other conferences. So they're really mostly speaking about the teams in their own conference and what they see and what they feel. But that was, I think, helpful for us to sort out, how to rank teams within their own conferences. And I know that our committee members spoke quite a bit with teams within their conferences and with many of the coaches around the country to kind of get more of a perspective of what the coaches that they dealt with from around the country felt about their own teams in their own conference. So I think it was a large effort that the regional advisory committee helped us, but I think the men's ice hockey committee members also took it upon themselves to do a lot of their own research and talk to colleagues around the country to get a better perspective of what they felt.
I'm sure this was some pretty hard work over the past few hours, and it must have been a pretty stressful thing to go through.
It was. I've made this comment before, but it's on a personal level, it was the most stress I've felt since I've been coaching. And it was a stressful exercise. In the past, we've had a fairly simplistic way to look at it. We realize what it means to teams who are in and what it means to teams who are on the bubble and out. I've been on both sides of it personally, so I know that angst. And I know all of us who were on the committee took that charge very seriously. We're very we're very intent on doing the best job we possibly could. And we gave it our best. We gave it our all, and we left no stones unturned.
I think you kind of answered the next question, which is, are you going to be looking forward to getting what has been colloquially named the pairwise? You're going to be looking forward to getting the numbers back next season?
That would be an understatement. I think that is going to be something we're going to be welcoming with open arms, I'll tell you.
We're talking with Mike Kemp, the chair of the Men's Division I Ice Hockey Committee. I don't think I've ever heard anybody, coaches, athletic directors, fans, ever talk about the pairwise in such a positive light, Mike. So that's a good thing. Hey, going back to the top, and we talked about St. Lawrence obviously having to be out. I think they mentioned on the selection show, but take us through what the process is here if there are further cases. Obviously, St. Lawrence just played Quinnipiac last night, so you're not totally immune to potentially some passing of COVID from coach to players and all that stuff, or however it could go. Where do we go from here if somebody else tests positive from another team?
Well, as the NCAA set up the rules, between now and 7 p.m. tomorrow night, if a team does turn a positive, if the team turns a positive, then we will be able to replace that team. It turns to positive and cannot compete. I'm not going to say that, that it depends on the institution. But, if a team is unable to compete, then they'll be replaced. But that's within 24 hours. After tomorrow, 24 hours after the selection, the field is set. And should there be any further problems where a team could not compete, and that has that occur, then there will not be a replacement for that team. That team that they were going to play against will just automatically have a bye into the next round.
I don't want to make assumptions based on what you've said here, but if there was a replacement, is Providence the next team in for you guys?
They are the next team up.
Okay. And I assume there's been some conversations about that, that they'd actually be aware of that.
I believe so, yes. The NCAA was going to be alerting them and any other teams that might be considered candidates for being entered into the tournament should somebody else drop out.
Okay. We hear it from fans a lot here about what is going to happen with attendance. We've heard that North Dakota, Fargo will have some fans out there. Albany, potential to have some fans there. There's going to be COVID testing requirements with that. Can you go through each regional site and maybe even go into Pittsburgh and talk about what we're going to have in terms of potential attendance and how tickets can be attained and what type of pre-testing or anything like that might be necessary?
Well, if I'll start out in Loveland. In Loveland, because of county and state rules in Colorado, there will be only a pass list involved with attendance there. There will not be tickets for sale to the public. So it'll just be limited to team pass list for those teams that are going to be competing out there. In Fargo, as you said, they will be able to have their building at the 25% limit that the NCAA has allowed for all of their teams, all of their championships this year. That's a limit that goes from basketball to all the other sports. So they'll be at their 25% limit there. In Albany, as you said, there will be some negative test requirement for purchasing tickets, but they, because of state and county rules, will be at 15% for ability for attendance. And in Bridgeport, they will be like Loveland, where there will be no public sale. It will just be pass list for the 4 teams that are participating there. So that's kind of where the regionals shake down. And as with the Frozen Four in Pittsburgh, we will be at 25% capacity of Pittsburgh Paint Arena. That will be opened. I think it becomes on the 4th of April. They'll be opening up to 25% in Pennsylvania, which allows us to go to 25% in the Frozen Four. So tickets for the Frozen Four I want to say they're going to be going out first and foremost to the priority ticket holders. We'll get a notification, and then it'll be open to public after that. I'm not sure what day they're going on sale.
Mike, before we let you go, is there anything we've missed here? Because this has been such as you said, stressful day, crazy day. But have we missed anything as you're kind of going through? What might else we need to know as we're heading into this tournament beginning on Friday?
Well, I hope that people understand that it has been an unusual day, that it has been an unusual challenge for everybody involved, and for those teams that are not in the tournament. I feel for those teams, having, as I said, been there before. It was not an easy process to get to. It was one that we took seriously and made a very, very concerted effort to make sure that we did this with fairness, with intention, and to the best of our abilities. And we just hope that and feel confident that we will have an outstanding tournament that hopefully we'll be able to crown a champion with no issues between now and the conclusion of the Frozen Four.
Well, Mike Kemp, chair of the Men's Division I Ice Hockey Committee, we appreciate your time. We always appreciate your candor, too. I think that that's very important to the fans and everybody in the college hockey community at a time like this in a strange year. And I think we all share your thoughts. Let's get us back to a normal year where pairwise and computers are used and take some stress off of everybody's plate. So thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
That's Mike Kemp, the chair of the Men's Ice Hockey Committee. We'll have more of USCHO's Weekend Review podcast, this special live edition, in just a moment.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Passion, talent, development. NCAA hockey offers all that, and its players graduate at a 90% rate. Johnny Gaudreau.
Backhand scores! Wow, what a goal!
Joe Pavelski. And Shane Gostisbehere were stars on campus before the NHL stage. Whether you are a fan or a player, nothing compares to college hockey. Visit collegehockeyinc.com and follow @collegehockey.
Champions of the college hockey world!
Excuse me, I know you have a 9 o'clock, so I'll keep this short. I'm the business suit in the back of your closet. You wore me nearly every day before your office went, quote, casual. I used to be the CEO of your closet. Now I'm just that one intern no one ever talks to. I always thought you'd circle back with me, get granular, keep me in the pipeline. But nada, nothing. Don't you remember the McKittrick presentation? You spilled coffee on me, and I still looked amazing during the breakout talkback Q&A. So, I think it's time for me to move on. I've got a great resume, and I absolutely crush it in interviews, okay? Let's make this a clean break. Shift the paradigm. The only thing I ask is that you think outside the box here and do this. Take me to Goodwill, where I can really make a difference.
Your donations to Goodwill create new jobs, training programs, and education assistance for people in your community. To find your nearest donation center, go to goodwill.org. Donate stuff. Create jobs. A message from Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to this special live edition of USCHO.com's Weekend Review podcast. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Before we move on, Jim, we do want to mention that USCHO's bracket contest is up and live. And if you go to USCHO.com, you can see the link right on the front page. You can play against your friends, put groups together, and even win valuable prizes. So what could be better? This is the real bracket, the bracket of 16.
It is. You know, my basketball bracket was shot the first day, so might as well jump in on something much better and something I enjoy and have some knowledge about, which is the hockey. And I guarantee you that I will be pretty much done on the first day once we get into hockey as well. But it is what it is. I do believe, I don't know that we've had a perfect bracket since we've been running the bracket challenge on here. I do know that we did a staff bracket, and I was, my memory is serving right, and I'm just bragging, that I was the last person to go perfect, but that was all the way back in 2002 when there was only 12 teams.
Well, I know a whole ton of brackets got destroyed in 2019 by everybody who picked St. Cloud State in the first round of that regional. We'll get back to the regionals in a moment.
Usually the way it goes, Ed. You know, there's that one huge 4-over-1 upset that you probably saw coming. And listen, as I said, you know, Atlantic hockey teams have been fantastic in the first round of this tournament. Second round, it's a little tougher, and playing that second game and 2 nights against another opponent, usually as tough and probably playing as good a hockey as anybody, is difficult. But, you know, Atlantic hockey has had a very good record in the first round of this tournament.
Yeah, and I think North Dakota is still a very, very heavy favorite in that matchup. But in a single game, you get some good goaltending, you get a timely power play goal, you get a turnover. Things can turn around very quickly. Well, before we get on to the brackets, Jim, let's recap a little bit from Mike Kemp. I have to agree with you. His candor and transparency as chairman of the committee is terrific. There are no secrets. It's right out there. This is what we're doing. And it was a tremendous job that they did. But one thing jumped out at me when we talked about the criteria, especially as it got down to looking at Notre Dame, Omaha, and then the team that would be out, the 17th team, if you will, and the team that might be the replacement if somebody unfortunately would have to step out. And that was a criterion that was not a published one, but was one of those that we kind of suspected might be part of the eye test. And that is record against teams already in the tournament in their league. And as I scanned through it, it looks to me like Providence had just one win against teams in the tournament, a win back in January against BU. Am I missing one, or does that sound correct?
No, you have it right, Ed. And you know what the difficulty for me in that was that I was kind of looking at the pairwise and using that to compare teams within their own league. So last night, as I was sitting there doing my bracketology, I wasn't even considering Providence because they were actually behind UConn. And those two teams had split, so you're kind of going by the RPI at that point. And the one thing I wondered was where bonus points were coming in, given that, a lot of teams to get bonus points, you had to, I believe, have a win against the top 16. And in certain conferences, you wouldn't play a team that's in the top 16, the pairwise, or of the RPI. So I don't know that what the reasoning was that UConn wasn't the next Hockey East team considered over Providence, because if you took UConn's record against teams in the field, it was actually better than Omaha's. So that was one that kind of confused me. I never asked Mike about it. I didn't want to put him too much on the spot, especially because he was outside of the discussions because Omaha was involved. He has to recuse himself every time his team comes up. He's the assistant or associate athletic director at Omaha. So that was what maybe confuses me. I don't know if they were intentionally staying away from Connecticut because they're one game below 500. I don't know if they had a different system on how league to league they were awarding bonus points or something like that. I don't know. That's the one question mark that goes through my head, because I would have said the next team to be considered would be UConn. Providence would have been right after them, but knowing that Providence is the next team up, should there be a cancellation, Providence would get into this tournament. We'll know that by 7 p.m. tomorrow night. But it kind of hit me that maybe UConn should have been the next team considered from Hockey East, and if so, they would have had the edge over Omaha.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that as he mentioned it, and there must have been something that made there be a split there, and perhaps it is one that he mentioned right at the beginning, which is winning percentage. And Connecticut, even though the Huskies matched up well against Providence, their overall record was sub 500 after the Hockey East playoffs. So that may have been the dividing line there. But when we talk about the other... Oh, go ahead, Jim.
No, possibly. I mean, that is the one thing that can stick in my mind, is that either there was some sort of a tweak that they used within the conference for an RPI and thus affecting the pairwise, or they really just didn't want to consider teams. I mean, because you never heard him mention Denver, which a lot of people thought should have been in 3 games under 500. I've been saying for a while. But, Jason Morey and I had started using those comparisons in the last couple of weeks in bracketology, trying to see how teams did against the best 2, 3, 4 teams in their conference, teams that we thought would make the field. And that was how at least last night, that was how I was deciding my bubble. And because of that, I had mentioned Notre Dame a few weeks ago, but had kind of lost them in my head as I was going through last night. I guess I never ran the numbers on Notre Dame as how they did against Minnesota, how they did against Michigan, how they did against Wisconsin. They had wins, number of losses, but there was a lot of games played.
We'll run the numbers right now, both for Omaha and for Notre Dame, as I've been looking it up as we've been discussing it. Let's talk Omaha. Against the three teams from the NCHC that are in the tournament, they had one tie with Minnesota Duluth. They had 2 wins over North Dakota, one of them in overtime, and they had a win over St. Cloud State. So that right there is a better record than Providence had against teams in the tournament from Hockey East. When we go to Notre
Certainly
Dame,
Providence, yes.
Yeah, we go to Notre Dame, 2 wins over Michigan, 2 wins over Minnesota, and a tie with Wisconsin. So that even puts them maybe even better than Omaha in that category, although they were selected as the last team in. But both of those would give the edge to them over Providence.
And don't necessarily go right by wins when you're comparing them. You almost have to go by how many times they played these opponents too, because winning percentage is probably the most important thing. I was, if you go with wins and ties, I've been throwing ties out because ties are just they're 500 in the overall. I was looking at wins, but I also was looking at winning percentage last night. And I think I came up with Omaha against the top 3 teams, top 4 teams. I used games against Denver too, because I had them as a team kind of under consideration. I think it was about a 364 winning percentage. UConn against the top 4 teams in Hockey East. So going BC, BU, UMass, and Providence was a little over 400, about a 406 or a 450. And I wrote it last night. If you go to bracketology on uscho.com, you can see it. But regardless, I understand where they're going. I just thought that the next team in line to be compared against, instead of being Providence, would have been UConn.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you include Providence. That's 2-2 against Providence. So you take them out of it, and it's going to be a lower percentage, probably in the same neighborhood as Omaha. But you think back about those 2 wins that Notre Dame had over Minnesota. I guess part of it also is where they are in the rankings. In any case, Providence, with just the 1 win over BU, kind of puts them behind everybody. The question does remain between Connecticut and Providence, and my hunch is it has to do with winning percentage. But I guess that was one of the things that really stood out from our conversation with Mike. Another thing was bracket integrity. And you asked that question about picking teams for the regions and whether travel wasn't part of it. Since there is no consideration whatsoever that needs to be made for attendance, because at 25% in Fargo and 10% in Albany, there's going to be no trouble filling either one of those buildings to the allotted attendance, and then none in Bridgeport or Loveland. Attendance didn't have to be part of it. And then when you also figure if you have to fly a team, then you're going to fly them. If you're going to get on an airplane, you're going to fly anyway. So if you're in a situation where a team has to fly, that doesn't end up being part of it. And then there's the bracket integrity situation. AIC, you could have kept them in the East, but then the number 1 overall seed wouldn't have played the number 16 seed. And rarely, if ever, does that happen. It hasn't happened in a few years.
Correct. Travel, I think that travel was thrown out, and I'm okay with this. Like, as long as you're doing it across the board, travel was thrown out as in terms of being a concern. And, I never asked Mike Kemp. I should have asked this. And my assumption is that every team that's traveling, so that's now going to be a good part of this field when you really look at it. North Dakota obviously can go by bus. Maybe Duluth can go to Fargo by bus. Boston College and Boston University can both go to Albany by bus, and UMass can definitely go to Bridgeport by bus. But other than that, there's not a lot of bus rides in here. I assume they're going to use charter planes. That's the easiest way. It's by far the most expensive way as well. I mean, you're talking 11 round trip charter flights. I don't know what a charter plane costs, $35,000-$45,000. That's a huge hit to the NCAA budget when you don't have any ticket revenue or very little ticket revenue to make things up. But I think the NCAA understands if they're going to put on this tournament, there's going to be a lot. They're going to operate at a massive deficit this year on all of their tournaments, including maybe even men's basketball, where the TV revenue is strong, and maybe that one makes the money. But the expenses are high. And for me, I'm actually kind of pleased to see that the NCAA didn't make it about trying to save money. I think that it's good to keep the integrity of the tournament and your bracket in shape. I don't know if we have true 116, 215. I don't know. But looking at the way this shakes out and where I kind of had teams, I almost think we do. I feel like you've got, I'm just looking at the Bridgeport regional, let's say 4. Wisconsin, was Bemidji probably 13? They were either 13 or 14. They were darn close. Was Massachusetts probably 5? Yes. And was Lake Superior State probably 12? It's likely. If they're a 3 seed, they're probably the lowest 3 seed. So I feel like they really put bracket integrity ahead of a lot of other components, and I like that. I think that makes a more pure tournament, and it gives more fair competition. So if you put a ranking behind these 16 teams of how they fall, to keep them in a position where they are all playing the right opponent in the first round, I think makes things very fair.
And I think it's possible that the expense of a charter flight isn't that dramatic considering these cities. None of these are a major airport. These are all going into hubs. These are regional airports. They're going to have to go through a hub if you go commercial. Getting to Loveland or Fargo or Albany or Bridgeport, you're not going to fly to Logan and drive down. So it's all a hop to a smaller airport. So maybe the difference in cost is not that much. And certainly the time in the air is going to be way different, way better with the charter.
Right. And, I don't, again, we, had Mike Kemp on the phone. I had a lot of planned questions, never got around to the one about how they are going to travel. What days are they going? How early do they have to get there? If you're playing on Friday, are you going out tomorrow or Monday? Or are you going out Tuesday so that you can be there, go through a couple of days of full on testing so that you're making sure that you have all of your protocols in place? I don't know.
And that stuff may still be in process.
That's the case. Say that again, Ed.
That all may still be in process right now.
It could be. I'm sure that every team that was selected is on a call somewhere with, one of the hosts from each region. And that usually is done Monday at 9 a.m. I bet it's done Sunday at 9 p.m. this year.
Yeah.
Because there's an urgency. There's a need to know. There's a need to get all of that stuff taken care of. There are no bubbles in this. So if anybody thinks that there's any bubble atmosphere in this, there's not. You're still using regular hotels. That these players are not on confinement lockdown by the NCAA. Would their coach or their school maybe say you don't leave your hotel except to go to practice, eat or go to games? Possibly, probably. But the NCAA, from what I understand, is not locking down these student athletes. They didn't in basketball, and they're not, I would assume, in hockey. So there will be some, there's a need for daily testing, and there will be daily testing out there, and I'm sure they will have both rapid testing and PCR testing available. You do the rapid test, you have a potential or an inconclusive, then maybe you have to do a PCR, then you're maybe in a situation where that player is now 24 hours out, has to quarantine for 24 hours, or can't be around his team for 24 hours. These are all things that are probably in a handbook somewhere that I have yet to read, but those are the assumptions I'm kind of making on what I've seen with other sports this year and how they have to operate.
Well, why don't we get back to the brackets before we talk with Mike Kemp? We had talked about the Fargo bracket, which you rightly characterized as a bracket of death. North Dakota, Michigan, Minnesota Duluth, AIC, and that any one of those three upper ones, and, I don't want to discount AIC, but North Dakota, Michigan, Minnesota Duluth, all have been talked about for the Frozen Four, and you got to get through the top seed to get on to the Frozen Four from that regional. So let's take a look at the next one in order, and that's the Albany Regional. We started on that. Boston College is the top seed there. They take on number 4 seed Notre Dame, St. Cloud State, and BU, the other half of that bracket.
Another pretty tough bracket here. I don't know what Notre Dame is going to put forward. At times, they look like a great team, and I think a lot of it for Notre Dame is how goaltending factors in. I assume we'll see Dylan St. Cyr when they start on Saturday. But that's a tough matchup for BC. There's a lot of talent on that Notre Dame team, but there's a ton of talent on Boston College. So if Spencer Knight can bounce back and play good hockey, that should be one that BC can get past. St. Cloud State, Boston University. I never know night in, night out what to expect from Boston University. Sometimes they feel like a very motivated team. Sometimes they feel like a team that I don't even know if they want to keep playing their season. That's just what you see from them on the ice. They had some really quality wins within Hockey East this year. They only got to play, off the top of my head, 15 games. And, so there's not a good sample size, and you're going to play a very battle-tested St. Cloud State team that easily could have won the NCHC tournament championship. That's a very talented team. So I think that's a tall test for BU. And then if you were to get your top two seeds, Boston College and St. Cloud State, into a final, boy, that could be a track meet for the ages. That could be a 7-6 game by the end of it with really good goaltending. There's a lot of scoring power on those two teams. So I think that's a very good read. I called Fargo the bracket of death. I believe that, but this might be the bracket of purgatory. I don't know. Like it's by far the next toughest of the four brackets.
The third in order was Minnesota. They're the third number one. They will take on Omaha, while the other half of the bracket has number 2 Minnesota State and number 3 Quinnipiac. Why don't we start with that one, just because it's fresh in my mind. Mike Hastings really wants to get past the first round with his team, but you're going to have a battle of two of the best goalies in the country, with Keith Petruzzelli in the nets for Quinnipiac and Dryden McKay for Minnesota State. What kind of a game can you expect from that? When you see two great goalies like that, you expect a low-scoring game, but these are also talented teams offensively.
Yeah, I think that Quinnipiac probably has to be concerned with generating scoring chances. And the fact that, I look at Minnesota State, and they obviously did not have a good game against Northern Michigan the other night. And a lot of it probably is that Northern Michigan has seen that team a lot. Quinnipiac has not seen Minnesota State this year, and that probably raises a bit of a challenge for Quinnipiac, because the one thing that Minnesota State does is locks things down very well. But there's still a monkey on the back of the Minnesota State team. They've never won a game in the NCAA tournament. They came so close a couple of years ago, had an early 3-0 lead against Providence, and then penalties got in the way, and they end up losing. I believe it was 6-3. So things go that way. But I look at this as that's a pretty good, maybe evenly matched game. I think that whomever comes out of that game will be a heavy underdog, no matter who they play, whether it's Minnesota or Omaha in the regional final. Omaha is a 4 seed. That's a pretty good 4 seed right there, going up against a Minnesota team that we obviously know has a ton of talent, able to win the Big Ten championship.
We've seen Minnesota stumble a couple of times this season, most notably against Wisconsin in the regular season, but they came back and really handled the Badgers well, and it seems like Bob Motzko has his Golden Gophers, running on all cylinders right now.
Yeah, played well in the Big Ten tournament. I liked the way they played in that tournament. They had that explosive second period against Wisconsin. They seem to be doing things well. They seem to be doing things right. Obviously Wisconsin had nice pushback, but Minnesota was able to, withstand. And that's one of the difficult things sometimes, is when you know that there's desperation on the other side, how do you respond to it? And listen, they get a lead against Omaha. Omaha's going to have some pushback. They're explosive. They can score goals. I'm interested in this one. I don't know right now if I had a gun to my head, who would I pick? I don't know. That's a tough one for me, because I think that if there is maybe 4 versus 1 in this tournament. I know that Boston College becomes a little vulnerable against Notre Dame, a little bit of a rival, a good team that has been excellent in postseason, especially the NCAA postseason in recent years. I think that has a potential, but this might be the matchup that I think is the most vulnerable, number one, Minnesota against Omaha.
Well, let's take a look at the fourth region. That's Bridgeport. Number 1 in that is Wisconsin. They'll take on number 4, Bemidji. Number 2, UMass. And number 3, Lake Superior State University. Lake State has won 6 games in a row, and they have played very well down the stretch, obviously. They're going to take on a very good UMass team that is playing very well right now either. This should be a pretty fascinating matchup. And neither of those teams know each other very well.
No, not at all. And there's not a lot of tape out there to be seen on Lake State. I mean, and the quality of video sometimes is not the highest in some of those games that are shown on Flow Hockey. No offense to Flow Hockey, but I think that this whole region is the litmus test for the WCHA and the soon to be CCHA. This is kind of should they have gotten 3 teams in the tournament? Should Bemidji State have been in as opposed to Providence or UConn or somebody from Hockey East? This is where we're going to see it. And if, both Bemidji and Lake State get blown away, then I think, listen, they're both underdogs. I understand that. But then we're going to be sitting here saying, boy, did the committee get it right? And that's kind of the question. I'm not picking on the committee at all. It's just these are difficult decisions. And without a pairwise to kind of dictate, it becomes a little bit of a challenge. But I think that this whole region is kind of the measuring stick for what these 3 teams from the WCHA are facing. And listen, we've heard, I mentioned it already, Minnesota State, they've got that monkey of can they win a game? Lake State hasn't been in the tournament in forever. Bemidji State, it's been quite some time for them as well. I think, were they a member of the CHA the last time they got in? I'm kind of blanking. I don't know what conference they were in the last time Tom Serratori got his team in, but were they ever? I'm losing my conference.
They were in the Frozen
alignments and all of that sort of stuff.
They were in the Frozen Four in 2009.
In 2009, that was it. Correct. Yeah. Okay. So, I just don't know what to expect from those 2 teams. And neither does Wisconsin playing Bemidji, and neither does UMass playing Lake State. The one thing I've watched a lot of both of those teams this year, and Wisconsin, tons of talent. Love the way that they play. Obviously, high-end offense and good defense. UMass, great defense. Maybe they don't have the high-end offense to match, but they've got great defense and great goaltending. Now it will be up to Lake State and Bemidji to show that they belong in this tournament.
I want to get some quick hits on a few points here before we wrap up this live podcast. Denver had a lot of people even in media really lobbying for them. Their NCAA streak ends at 12.
Yeah, for Denver, for me, wins are wins. And they're a good team. They played some very tough competition, but if you don't win the games, then it's very difficult to just put teams in. And maybe that's what it came down for Connecticut as well. But wins are wins. And 3 games under 500 to me doesn't feel like a team. When you had, we now see a field in front of us that has a lot of teams. Bemidji State, Lake State, and I know Lake State was an auto qualifier. Notre Dame, pretty good records. And if you're 9-10 games above 500, you deserve to be in. If you're 3 games, 4 games above 500 in a very tough conference like Notre Dame, I think they were only 1 game above. So it's still a 4-game swing, tough conference as well. I don't know if they graded out the conferences in some way. I had been doing that in bracketology, and that was what was trying to make me always put at least 4 NCHC teams in until last night when I had to make that decision because of the St. Lawrence win. But I think that Denver had some quality players, a quality team, but you got to win the games.
This year, all 5 Minnesota teams made it in for the first time. Next year, there will be 6 Minnesota teams when St. Thomas is added to the CCHA. How about that for the state of hockey?
Yeah, well, it's been the whole season when you look at it. They've been, some of these teams have been right around the top 10 in the USCHO poll all year. There's quality teams out there, and I think that despite the fact that they're not all in the same conference, that there's mixed conferences throughout here, you still have the desire to be and even though you're not in the same conference, when Minnesota Duluth is having success, that pushes Minnesota State to be better, despite the fact they're not in the same conference. You just look at it, and I guarantee athletic directors want better coaches. They want to spend more money because they see a team like Minnesota Duluth win 2 straight national championships. They want to be better. They want to improve. And I think that everybody's putting the resources in the right place right now. And that's, I think, when push comes to shove, that still, to me, good coaches do a lot, but good resources do more. So if it comes down to resources, I think that these 5 schools can be seen as doing an excellent job of funding their programs properly.
And finally, Hockey East. 3 teams get in. We hear that Providence would have been the 17th team, and they're kind of waiting in the wings if somebody can't go forward. The league has to be disappointed to only get 3 teams in.
Certainly. When I texted a little bit with Steve Metcalf as the show was going on, as the selection show was going on, the commissioner of hockey, he was just disappointed, obviously disappointed. And that's to be expected. I mean, this was a very competitive league. I think that you have at least 2 teams in this conference who are among the best in the nation in Boston College and UMass. You had a Umass Lowell team that down the stretch, they had so many pauses in their season. They never could get things going. Then down the stretch, they played well. I talked to Greg Carville today. He said, man, they gave us everything last night, a 1-0 win for UMass in the title game over Umass Lowell. Obviously, UConn, they were hampered by a difficult schedule. There was points where they were healthy, and really the only teams they could play were Boston College and UMass, and they kept playing them. And, they end up with by far one of the strongest strengths of schedule among hockey's teams. And then Providence, maybe didn't win the right games at the right time. Good team, will get better. But, could there have been another hockey's team? Maybe I am biased. I think so. But I understand. Notre Dame did a lot of the right things. And at the end of the day, that was a consistently inconsistent league throughout the year. Yes, Minnesota had a really fast start. Yes, Wisconsin had an unbelievable finish to the regular season. But overall, that league was so inconsistent. So wins happened for teams that were not at the top of the league over, some of the good teams. And Notre Dame ends up winning enough of those games. I think you pointed out it was 4 or 5 that they ended up having in a tie. I think it was 4 wins in a tie, 2 against Michigan, 2 against Minnesota, a tie against Wisconsin. Pretty good resume. And they get into the tournament. So, for Hockey East, I just think that they'll maybe write this one off, and they'll be probably the one conference the most of all that looks forward to the pairwise returning.
Well, I don't think we had too many surprises. I guess you could say Notre Dame was a bit of a surprise. But when we think back a month or so and what the committee was saying, and that winning percentage would be a big part of it, we've seen that. And then the record against teams already in, that makes a lot of sense. And that's and that's what we've got. We've got something that makes a lot of sense. Certainly there's disappointment for some teams, but this is overall a pretty darn good bracket.
I think so. I think the committee did a lot of work, got a lot of things right.
Jim, a lot of times people would expect us to pick a Frozen Four bracket. I'm feeling like it's too early for me to pick. I think but I'll throw it out there anyway, since you're prodding me on it. North Dakota has been the odds-on favorite all year. I like North Dakota in there. I like Minnesota coming out of their bracket. There's going to be an upset somewhere. Let's say Wisconsin and St. Cloud State. I'll put that together as a guess, and I'm going to change it once I've had to think about it. But North Dakota would take on Wisconsin, and Minnesota would have St. Cloud State in a Frozen Four, and you could end up with a Big Ten final. So
possibly. So I will give you mine. I'm going to go with North Dakota, just like you. Tough bracket, but I think they can get out of it. They have the team to get out. I'm going to move down to Bridgeport for my next one, because that one I'm going to go with UMass in that one. Mm-hmm. Albany, I still think BC gets out of it, and then I think in Loveland it's going to be Omaha. The number 4 seed is going to come out of Loveland.
Well, there's usually a 4 seed that wins somewhere, so we'll see. Like I said, mine may change tomorrow. We've got to do our picks. We're going to do our staff group on USCHO, and you can get a group together also. Go to uscho.com. And the bracket contest is on there. You can compete against your friends, and you can also compete to win valuable prizes. And that's at uscho.com. Any last words, Jim, before we wrap up tonight?
Let's get it going. Let's hope that everybody stays healthy, stays safe. We want these 16 teams that are in this tournament to finish something in Pittsburgh in a few weeks' time. And
you and I will be among a slimmed down crew for USCHO.com. I mean, slimmed down in numbers at Pittsburgh. And we'll be there to cover it. And some of our staff will be doing some coverage remotely. And we're looking forward to that coming up. In fact, while I was watching the selection show, I saw the email come through that my credential was approved. So that's always a good sign when that happens.
Same here. And I always kind of raise a glass when I see that credential approval come through.
Well, we'll be covering this as we go along. But for tonight's live edition of Weekend Review, that's going to be it. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.